And good morning.
Good morning.
My scripture reading this morning, that is my inspired reading, it's not from the Bible, is from philosopher of religion Loyal Rue. The most profound insight in the history of humanity is that we should seek to live in accord with reality. Indeed, living in harmony with reality is this basic definition of wisdom. If we live at odds with reality, we shall be doomed. But if we live in proper relationship to reality, we can know joy. My second reading is from Carl Sagan. I also consider it scripture. Science is at least in part informed worship. I'd like to speak this morning on the subject of the big picture. And I promised Sue that I would, sometimes I sort of am all over the stage and this sort of thing, but I promised no aerobic preaching this morning. So I'll try to move a little slower than I might otherwise. So the big picture, why is the big picture important? What is the big picture? Well, the big picture is a culture or a society's creation myth. It's their story that helps explain pretty much everything. Where things came from, why things are like they are, where things are headed, and how to make sense of the challenges of our time living in the present. It integrates all knowledge, mythic, scientific, evidential, and even inspirational. What it is that inspires us, what it is that what moves us. And so I want to cover three main points. I mean, every sermon's supposed to have 3 points, right? So I'm going to cover 3 points in this sermon. And what I want to speak to or address is, what is it about our best scientific, our best evidential understanding of reality now, that if you don't know it, you kind of go crazy in this crazy-making world? I mean, how can we be present to the challenges that we're all experiencing if you just turn on the TV or read the newspaper or go online or just listen to conversation? You pull your hair out sometimes. It's like, this is not the world that we thought we were living in 5, 10, 20 years ago. And so I want to start, and the subtitle, The Big Picture, what every young person and every grandparent should know. And this being Father's Day, I'm saying young people and grandparents, because if young people and grandparents don't know this, dads go nuts. It's a very difficult time to be raising children and a very difficult time to be taking care of or supporting or in some way being a blessing to your aging parents. So what are the few things that we really, if we know these things and we bring them in our heart and we just live out of them, we're going to have a lot more joy even in absolutely chaotic times. And make no mistake, we are living in what is sometimes called Teotihuacan, the end of the world as we know it. Doesn't necessarily mean the end of the world, full stop, but it does mean the end of the kind of living arrangements that all of us in this room took for granted in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and really up until maybe 10 years ago. So I want to start with a little bit of sort of reverse psychology. So here are 5 things. They're key, they're absolutely essential to making yourself and other people around you as miserable as possible. Okay, so you got to remember these, because these will absolutely cause you to have real emotional challenges and spread that around as widely as you can. So the first is to cling tightly to the vision of perpetual progress. I mean, don't let go of that one. Ignore all the evidence to the contrary. Ignore all the evidence of contraction or collapse or political insanity or economic corruption. Ignore all that stuff and cling tightly to the secular religion of perpetual progress. Guaranteed that will make you miserable and spread that misery as things continue to spin down. 2, make absolutely sure you know who is at fault and blame them. Find the people who have caused this mess, those people who have gotten in the way of progress, and make sure you just invest all kinds of time and energy in blaming them. Guaranteed to make yourself miserable and spread the misery. Number 3, passionately evangelize for every solution and every fix that comes along. Be a solutionary. Don't be one of those doomers or a doomist. No. Focus on solutions, fixes. We can fix this problem. We can solve the climate crisis. Number 4. Notice these are following the Kubler-Ross stages of grief, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. And then where I live my life, on the other side of acceptance is finding the gift. Not just acceptance, but trusting and then being a blessing. So that's further down the sermon. So let me go. So number 4, wallow in despair and depression. Do as much doom scrolling as you can. Or if you don't like doing doom scrolling, just do as much desperate hope seeking as you can. And then 5, guaranteed, you have to do this if you're going to stay miserable and spread the misery to others. Spend as little time in nature as possible and as much time in front of your screens and indoors as possible. Now, obviously, I'm being goofy here. But the reason I'm being this is because if you look around, a lot of people are clinging on to and unwilling to even think that progress may be, that is perpetual progress, may be an illusion. Well, it is. And so now let me cover the big picture and why it is that I can make fun of these things, even though most of us still find ourselves occasionally here, and we certainly see it around us in our friends, our family, our neighbors, and certainly coming through the television and radio and anything we listen to. So the big picture. First is to understand, to really to learn the very basics of the shape of time. And I say this because we're not taught this in our churches or synagogues. We're not taught this in our families, in our schools. So how would we know this? Well, we don't. Most people don't know this. This is part of the big picture that we're not usually exposed to. The shape of time. There are fundamentally 2 shapes of time throughout all of human history. That is the last 2.5 million years, if you go with Homo habilis, walking upright using stone tools. The last 400,000 years, if you go with Homo sapiens. One is sustainable and the other is unsustainable. Sustainable means not changing anything. Learning the ways of nature. How does nature work? What is nature's economy? What's Gaia's economy? And then finding ways to live so that everything that's provided for your tribe or your culture, all the materials that you provide, the energy that you provide to eat, and all the materials for the things you build, all of that preserves the well-being of the systems that provide it for you. Truly sustainable, which is like the first 95% of human history, we live that way. We lived in a way that treated the living world as a greater thou, not a lesser it. It wasn't just a source of resources and a place for our waste. It was a divine being. They had lots of different names, but basically relating to the living world as our material, biophysical creator, sustainer, and end, which it is, factually. And it preserves the water systems, the soil, the forests, the other species. It basically makes sure that everything it provides you and your culture with everything it needs to survive and thrive is preserved upon pain of death or ostracizing. It was a sacred responsibility. And guess who bore that responsibility? Religion. Or lifeways. In indigenous cultures, it's not usually known as religion, but it's lifeways. In other words, there was always a voice within culture that spoke with moral authority that the future will not be compromised by the present. Known as accountability to the future. So that's sustainable, preservative. It's the opposite of extractive. Then we find over the last 7,000 or 8,000 years, boom and bust, rise and fall. Cultures become great, or at least for the elite and the ruling class, not for the slaves, obviously, and then it collapses. What happens is a culture overshoots the carrying capacity. That is, it takes too much from the living world and exudes too much waste. That's what's known as overshoot, and it breaks down. The systems start breaking down. We have over 100 examples in the last 8,000 years of cultures that rose and become great and collapsed. Rose and become great and collapsed. And it always collapses faster than it becomes great. And on the way, if you're born and you die, it usually takes about 250 years to 300 years. That's the average. And if you're born and die in times when things are expanding, more than enough energy, more than enough resources, things are good, at least if you're in the wealthy and the elite and ruling class, then of course you expect your kids and grandkids are going to have it better than you. And if you're born and die in times of decline, in times of fall, in times of regress, not progress, but regress, then of course your kids and grandkids are going to have it worse than you. That's just the way things are. But it's when you're born in times of expansion and it shifts in your lifetime, that's what we call suffering until we accept that that's the nature of reality. Once we accept that it's unstoppable, we don't have a single example in human history of any culture on the way down becoming sustainable. It can't be done. It's impossible. It would require breaking the laws of physics and ecology and biology. It can't be done. It's never been done. It's built on a totally unsustainable foundation. Here's the most easy way that I know of to describe the fundamental difference between genuinely sustainable cultures and unsustainable rise and fall, boom and bust civilizations. The difference between being life-centered and human-centered. Being life-centered, we belong to the land. Human-centered, the land belongs to us. Fundamental difference. And so unsustainable civilizations always collapse because they always overshoot the carrying capacity. That is, they use too much and exude too much waste, down it goes. Well, we're in one of those cultures, but now it's global. And the industrial civilization has done more damage to the air, water, soil, and life upon which we all depend, that it's not outside the realm of possibility that there will not only be no humans, but hardly any mammals in the next 30 to 40 years. Now, you may think this is totally crazy, like this guy's a total doomer. I've spent the last 9 years studying this. Things really are that bad. It may not be, but for us to assume that civilization, industrial civilization, can continue, well, we're setting ourselves up for serious disappointment. So the first is to be aware of the shape of time. And when we trust the shape of time, that we were born into like this, and now it's this, then we don't go crazy, because then it's like, oh, of course, of course, of course. See, I had this understanding in 2016. I knew Donald Trump would be elected a year before he was elected. And when he was elected, I didn't pull my hair out and say, ah! What I said was, yeah, this is the way empires and civilizations go crazy. This is the way they collapse. It's right on schedule. The second thing that we should really learn the basics of is the difference between true and false, or faux, or delusional sustainability. And I already pointed to it, which is the fundamental worldview of we belong to the land, or the land belongs to us. Whether you relate to the air, water, soil, and life upon which you depend as sacred. Sacred means more important than you, more important than us. Or whether you relate to the air, water, soil, and life as merely resources and a place for waste. After all, the fundamental thing that has done in dozens and dozens of civilizations is progress. Progress is what kills civilizations. Ralph Waldo Emerson famously said that the human race will eventually die of civilization. And what he was getting at was that human-centeredness kills the living world. It's that simple. And we're in a very human-centered civilization. So to not go crazy as a young person, it's not about, see, why this is so important is because, A, if we don't understand the fundamental shape of time, if we don't understand the real difference between real sustainability and fake or faux sustainability, then we're just going to be confused, we're going to be angry, we're going to be blaming, we're going to be judging, or we're going to be depressed. And that is all toxic to children. Children deserve to be in a context where we don't load all of our adult crap on them. I just stayed just 2 weeks ago, I stayed with a woman who's 89 years old, and she basically escaped the Nazis and has this incredible, and she said she was 9 years old. And so she was present. She was old enough to have some understanding of things, but also young enough to not be full of all of the toxic stuff that her elders held. And she was basically filled with the fascination to live life fully and to always look for other people that you can be a blessing to. Because, of course, that's what gives life its greatest joy, is when you can be a contribution, when you can have compassionate generosity and help some other person or some other species. To learn the basics of the unstoppable nature of collapse. This is something that, again, this is my whole life is devoted to this. I got tons of stuff on the Postdoom website. I've only had one video that went viral. It was called Collapse in a Nutshell. And collapse, I mean, we all saw television. I'm assuming almost all of us saw photos or the video of the trade towers, the World Trade Towers collapsing. Now, can you imagine how insane it would be if somebody tried to argue, oh, we can stop that collapse? And yet the collapse of the biosphere, the collapse of the stability of the Holocene, the collapse of the jet stream that used to keep things really stable and now is doing this, those are just as unstoppable. They just take longer. They're just over a long period of time. And yet if we don't truly accept, see, there's collapse awareness. That's where the stages of grief are. Awareness is hell, if that's all you've got is awareness. That can lead to collapse acceptance and then collapse trust. And when you get to the place of collapse trust, then you're ready to be an incredible blessing as a grandparent to young people. Because in collapse trust, you realize it's unstoppable. So you no longer have the blame and judgment and anger and desperation. If we all just got solar panels, if we all, got wind turbines, if we all a Green New Deal and all the other things that big-hearted activists and environmental activists, and believe me, I've been there. I've been picketing out in front of, gas stations against Exxon, and I've done that. And yet, coming to understand these things, the shape of time, true and fake sustainability, the unstoppable nature of collapse, has allowed me to not only accept the unstoppability of collapse, but to trust it. It was unstoppable for thousands of years. It's not just the fossil fuel companies. It's not just capitalism. It's not that other party. It's none of that. I mean, it's all of that in little ways, sure. But the larger patterns are so big that it was unstoppable for thousands of years. And we just happen to be alive. And we can either bemoan that and say, God, this is so unfair. Why do I have to be alive now? Why does my kid or grandkid need to be alive now? And that's a totally legitimate place. It's a place that most of us go to at some point. But we can also be present to, oh my Lord, I'm alive today. I still am conscious. I can still go to the grocery store. I can still put gas in the tank. I can still feel grief. Grief is a great gift. As my great mentor, Joanna Macy, said, the depth of your grief is the measure of your love. You wouldn't be feeling grief if you didn't love. And so I don't ever want to go. I don't want to recover from grief. I want to feel at least some sadness when I learn of other species dying or people suffering in different parts of the world. And believe me, as Al Gore likes to say, you turn on the TV and it's like a nature walk through the book of Revelation. There's no, I don't have to convince anybody of doom or bad news because we all feel it. Many people don't understand collapse because they don't understand the things I just outlined, but we all feel it. So now let me conclude with really what the big picture, we have a lot of evidence over several thousand years, and a lot of evidence, especially in the last, say, 800 years, about how to survive and not only survive, how to thrive, how to have tremendous joy, how to be practically legendary in your generosity and your compassion and your involvement in your communities. See, we actually have lots of evidence on how people still have really great lives in the midst of collapse. Because there's lots of examples of collapse. And in those cultures that were written cultures, there was lots of writing about these extraordinary people that were able to live extraordinary lives, even in the midst of contraction. Because that's what it is. From our perspective, it's not, boom, collapse like this. It's contraction. So the biggest thing is to understand that perpetual progress was always a myth. We have over 100 examples of progress, regress, progress, regress, progress, regress. It's never everlasting. It's never eternal. And it's usually only for the elites and ruling class. The slaves and others, animals, they don't consider progress. So the first is to recognize. I find myself almost because most of the audiences I speak to are progressive. Unitarian Universalists have been on the vanguard of progressive religion. Think about the word progressive. It's about progress. I mean, we stand on this understanding and we stand on it, and it's a foundation. The arc of the moral universe is long and it bends towards justice. Well, the arc of the civilizational universe is short and it bends towards collapse. And we happen to be in that time where we grew up like this, unless you were born in the last 20 years, and we're now this. And so we will either go crazy with that, or we accept that and then find ways to actually have even greater joy and greater contribution, because we're no longer trying to save civilization. Civilization can't be saved. It's homo colossus is the way my great mentor, William Catton, called it. Homo colossus. It's where each one of us in the industrial world uses 30 to 50 times the resources and exudes 30 to 50 times the waste of Homo sapiens. Homo colossus is destined for near-term extinction. That may or may not mean the extinction of Homo sapiens, but it's certainly a possibility. I guarantee you it's more likely that we will go extinct in the next 20 to 30 years than we're going to live on Mars the way Elon Musk wants us to. That's insane. It's techno-insanity. Because not only is progress the main cause of ecocide, you got suicide, homicide, ecocide, but technology. Turns out when I've studied the last 8 years, I've studied the history of technology. From fire and sticks that could kill at a distance, spears that could kill at a distance. First time any animal could kill at a distance was when we developed spear chuckers. So you step back and look at the whole history, more than 100,000 years of technology, and you realize that technology that benefits humans but doesn't benefit other creatures and doesn't become food for other creatures at its end always creates more problems. It just does it over time. So, what are the keys to having joy? Okay, I want to come back to the subtitle. What are the things that parents, grandparents, young people really should know? Well, the first is that perpetual progress was never a possibility. Perpetual progress. And so that's letting go of that civil religion, that secular religion of perpetual progress, then allows us to be present to the miracle, the joy of everyday living. And we're not like either beating ourselves with guilt because we still eat meat, or we still fly to see our granddaughter, or we still whatever. We can let go of all that junk. It's time to completely let go all of the guilt and the blame and the self-righteousness and recognize that we're all in this together. It's not a matter of blame, it's a matter of compassion. We can have compassion for everyone and other creatures, and that brings tremendous joy. To accept and to trust that we're in an unstoppable process. Collapse is a process, not an event. So to understand that, see, and again, children, they don't have all this stuff, and so they're just present to what's real. In fact, children almost live from this stance. Okay, here's what's real. Now, what's possible? Living with that sense of possibility, just accepting reality as it is and accepting reality as it's not. That's the best thing we can do as parents, grandparents, and anybody working with young people, is to help them truly understand the nature of reality and then accept reality exactly as it is and exactly as it's not, including accepting each other. That's really what I define love. In fact, it's not just me. But love is accepting others exactly as they are and exactly as they're not, and wishing them the best, wanting the best for them. And when we do that, then we find ourselves standing shoulder to shoulder with other people of common heart, common desire to hold on to and to further liberal values and progressive values. Because it turns out in times of carrying capacity surplus, when there's more than enough resources, liberal values predominate. The pie's getting bigger and bigger. But in times of contraction and collapse, the pie is getting shorter, smaller and smaller, and divisions, out-group, in-group, all this infighting, and it's unstoppable. We will never rid the world of all that negative stuff. It'll just get worse. But we can sure do everything we can that in our churches, our neighborhoods, our families, we can indeed hold those values and hold them as sacred and precious. So it's the opposite of, oh God, we're screwed, so let's not do anything. No. Just because we can't save everything doesn't mean there's not a tremendous amount of good that we can do. And I'll cover this on Wednesday night. One of the things you'll be getting is a little notice that on Wednesday night we'll have a Zoom call where you're invited to watch a 20-minute video between now and then. And it's titled The New Serenity Prayer, Emotional Support for Environmental Dread and Climate Anxiety. And if you want to, between now and Wednesday night, watch that video and then let's spend an hour, 2 hours just in Q&A and response. Because one of the things that's so important is that when we get this big picture, what do we need to do in our heart and what can we do in our lives to ensure that we've got tremendous joy and love? And the way we live is an inspiration to young people. Because it's not our role to tell young people that, you know, we could be extinct in 20 or 30 or 40 years. No, no. Help young people be present. They're going to learn that anyway. You can't stop them from learning that. But what we can do is stay present to the miracle of living, the joy of being conscious, of having feelings, and then look for opportunities to be a contribution, to be a blessing to your neighbors. Get to know your neighbor. If you don't know your neighbors, like I'm talking people within a 2-block radius of you, get to know them. Do something kind or generous to them. The best time to get to know your neighbors is before the poop hits the oscillating fan. And trust me or don't, it doesn't matter whether you accept what I'm going to say or not, but things over the next 6 months, year, 2 years are going to continue to, we're all circling the drain, and things are not going to get better, they're going to get more difficult. And it's going to happen different in different, there's no way that we can know how it's going to show up. But what we can do is be present to how we can show up and be a generous, compassionate contribution to each other. And that's what nourishes our souls, to use religious language. Amen. Oh, wait, one important thing. There are a series of benefits. I want to make sure I end on this note, and during the whatever it's called, Q&A or talk back or whatever afterwards, we can discuss these. These are 7 benefits of accepting and trusting unstoppable collapse. There's benefits. It's kind of like a person who's diagnosed with a terminal condition. As long as they fight and try to stay alive and fight at all costs, and only a week before they die do they actually accept that they were dying all along, they don't experience these benefits. And the same way, if we don't accept the unstoppability of collapse, we're not going to experience these benefits. These benefits are first, compassion or clarity over confusion. Because when we understand this big picture, it's like, oh, of course, of course, of course. This is the way empires collapse. This is the way civilizations collapse. There's a certain political insanity that's common. There's a certain economic corruption that's common. It reprioritizes, so we get clarity over confusion, compassion replaces blame, and then love in action. I prefer that over activism. Love, where does love motivate you to be in action? Love and activism over desperate activism. It reprioritizes everything around what matters most and really what doesn't. There's a calm urgency to get complete with family, friends, others, your legacy, to get complete. Meaning that if somebody in your life were to die, you wouldn't be left with, oh, I never cleaned that up with them, I never told them how grateful I was, or whatever. It focuses attention on home, local, family, congregational family. It frees us up from certain shoulds, have-tos, and it frees us for certain coulds, get-tos. What it almost always brings is an overwhelming gift of gratitude. People who truly accept their mortality, and we're part of Homo Colossus. So if we accept Homo Colossus's mortality, that Homo Colossus is going to die and we're part of it, and we could be part of that process. We could die sooner than we would have liked. If we do that, what happens, and I was diagnosed with a cancer that could have killed me in 6 months, 12 years ago. And I got to that place of just trusting that, okay, I could die in the next 6 months. And I felt nothing but gratitude for the past and trust for the future, including a trust that might not include me. So that gratitude for being alive, aware, and able to feel, including feeling deeply. And then finally, a growing sense, an enlarged sense of self. The self doesn't stop with your skin. Alan Watts used to say the skin-encapsulated ego, that your self is the larger body of life, Gaia, the Milky Way. The whole universe is your larger self. And so these are some of the benefits that come, often powerfully, emotionally moving, when we truly accept what's real. And we don't try to cling on to what is sometimes called hopium. Hopium is like smoking the hopium pipe. It's like addiction to an impossible future. It gives you hope in the short run, but it's crushing disappointment when reality bites. And so let's support each other in staying present to reality, nurturing our hearts, finding ways of being blessing, and don't dump our toxic stuff on young people, but help them stay present to the miracle of life and nurture a deeper communion with life, however you can. The birds, the earthworms, the whatever plant, any way that you can nurture and help young people nurture a more intimate, personal, sacred relationship with the living world, you will be doing them and yourselves a great, great service. Amen.